Hello, I'm at Coombe Abbey Country Park today and want to talk about Jesus performing miracles, which we can read about in the New Testament, particularly in Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And of course he performed many miracles, and perhaps you have particular favourites. The category of miracles that I respond best to, I think, is when Jesus heals people. We've even got 3 occasions in the New Testament where Jesus brings people back to life. And perhaps those type of miracles we consider to be the most important ones, and the others are not so important. For instance, the first miracle that we hear about was Jesus turning water into wine in John chapter 2. That would appear to be somewhat of a luxury item, not particularly necessary maybe. And another unusual miracle was Jesus walking on water, and also then Peter walking on water, with Jesus enabling him to do that. And Jesus used those type of miracles, I think, as teaching tools. And that last one I referred to, we're going to look at this morning, and we're going to have a Bible reading from Matthew chapter 14. So I'm going to hand over to Lizzie. Thank you so much.
The reading is taken from Matthew 14:22 to 33 from the NIV. Jesus walks on the water. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went upon a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they had climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
Thank you, Lizzie. So I want to talk about Peter, and the fact that Peter is famous because he walked on water, although sometimes people criticize him because they believe that he failed with this. I think that Peter deserves a lot of credit for the courage that he shows in this situation, for the boldness, for his initial trust in Jesus to do something absolutely incredible. We don't know of anybody else apart from Jesus that ever did this. He certainly takes a big risk, and there are lots of lessons here for us to think about. There's much that we can admire in Peter, and there are examples of the virtues which he displays we should copy. Of course, I'm not suggesting we should try and walk on water, but certainly the qualities that Peter displays of courage and boldness and trust and risk-taking, all of these things we should think about in terms of what God is calling us to do and how we should live. Now, this is a passage that I've read lots and lots of times over the years, and you would have thought by now that everything that there is for a preacher to talk about would have been covered. Well, you would be wrong. You would be wrong, because not once, but twice in this reading, in the last few days, I've seen things as if I've never seen them before. The one later on is fairly simple. This one is a little bit more complicated, so you might need to listen carefully in order to understand where I'm going with this. What we have here is the disciples who had been struggling for hours in a difficult circumstances with strong waves, and then a mysterious figure walks on the water, and eventually they realise that possibly this is none other than Jesus himself. Peter recognised something here. maybe this was something he came to later on when he started to think about it, or maybe it was something instinctively he saw at the time. But it seems to me that he was able to recognize that the thing that threatened to be over his head was actually under the feet of Jesus. What on earth am I talking about? Well, that Peter was able to see that the water, that if things went pear-shaped, would be over his head, was under the feet of Jesus, because Jesus was walking on the water. Why would I say that? Well, there's a few verses in the letter of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, written by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Let me quote. The Apostle Paul wrote this: Jesus must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. For he has put everything under his feet. Isn't that interesting? He has put everything under his feet. And literally here, we even have the Sea of Galilee, and we have the water miraculously under the feet of Jesus. And there's a lesson here that I think that Peter and the other disciples learned in terms of Jesus' control and his mastery. And in simple terms, let me try to encourage you today by saying that whatever is threatening to be over your head, whatever that is under the feet of Jesus. That Jesus is that much in control of your life and your circumstances, and that trouble that is going on or that is brewing, whatever is threatening to be over your head is under the feet of Jesus. And that was literally true for Jesus and for Peter that day. For Peter, the danger perhaps of the boat capsizing, Peter ending up in the water and recognizing that Jesus was actually walking on the water. So there's a lesson there that I'd never seen before. And I also want to mention the fact that I think unfairly, almost bizarrely, that people sometimes say, typical Peter, putting his foot in it, literally, and that he'd failed once again, as so often he did. And in my last sermon, which you may have watched, I talked about the fact that Peter failed by disowning Jesus when he was in the courtyard. That night that when Jesus was arrested and he was being tried, Peter was out in the courtyard, and 3 times he disowned Jesus, and he certainly failed on that occasion. He felt very miserable for denying knowing his Lord. So that was failure. I wouldn't say that what happened here was failure. For sure, his faith faltered a little bit because he started to look at the wind, he started to look at the waves rather than looking at Jesus. But isn't it true that often we learn by doing things? So the irony here is you're listening today, but maybe you'd learn the lessons more if you're actually out there doing things rather than just sitting around and listening. However, it's a good principle. Certainly it's true of children, that very often in a school situation that the teachers get children to do things because they know that they'll learn more by doing. It's true of adults as well. And it's been true for me as well, that in these last 4 months that I have learnt a lot in this bizarre experience of all these restrictions with the coronavirus all around us. I've learnt so much by doing new things in terms of getting used to technology. What about you? There's a lesson here in terms of you also learning by doing things. Peter learned that day by stepping out onto the water, by doing something. All right, he began to sink, but he learned so many lessons that day. Maybe we should be learning things that will help us in our Christian lives by doing rather than by being passive. So we've thought about Peter. What about the other disciples? Well, Peter was the only one to get out of the boat and try and walk on water. The other disciples, they stayed very much in the boat. They played it safe. And someone has once said, there's no way anyone can walk on water if you don't get out of the boat. And my impression was that none of those disciples had any intention of even thinking about getting out of the boat on that particular occasion. They had had a traumatic time in that boat for many hours, and they were more worried about other things than whether they could walk on water or not. They had been concerned about the weather, about the stormy weather, and of course had been the little matter of unexpectedly a figure appearing, walking on the water, thinking, what is going on here? Is this a ghost? What is going on? So they were concerned about other things. They stayed in the boat and they played it safe. They played it safe. What about us? What about us as Christians? What about us as people who try to follow Jesus Christ? What about us? Do we play it safe? Should we play it safe? Should we be a bit more like Peter, prepared to take risks? Well, I'm not suggesting you abandon your face mask when you go in Tesco, but I am suggesting that sometimes you come out of your comfort zone under the leading and the direction of the Holy Spirit, that you're open to new possibilities, that you're bolder in your Christian life. So there's a challenge for you. Don't always play it safe. Allow God to lead you. We've thought about Peter walking on the water. We've thought about the other disciples who I don't think had any intention of getting out of the boat. Let us think about Jesus. He is the central character in this story. Jesus walks on water, and to start off with, they don't recognize him. It does remind me of the story I looked at recently in the last sermon. You may have watched it, and that was when the disciples once again were out and about. They were on the water once again. This time they were fishing. They'd fished all night without catching anything, and then there was a suggestion from a stranger on the beach, and they didn't recognize who it was, and this stranger cooked breakfast for them, and of course that turned out to be Jesus as well. So even the disciples who've been with Jesus for 3 years, and had learnt so much, we've got a couple of occasions there where they didn't even recognize him. And for us, maybe you're someone who tries to follow Jesus in your life. I'm wondering whether you're able to recognize Jesus when he appears. You might say, well, when does he appear? I haven't seen him. Well, we do see Jesus, and sometimes we see Jesus in other people. And sometimes at the time we may not be aware that the way that someone is acting, the way that they are speaking, it's very much as if Jesus is working through them, speaking through them. Words of wisdom that we need to hear, we need to listen to, and we need to respond to. So there's a challenge there for us today to be aware that Jesus wants to appear in different ways in our lives, to speak to us, to direct us, to encourage us, to guide us. We read in this passage that Peter and Jesus climbed into the boat, and when they did, something happened. The wind died down. That's what happened. And the reaction of the people in the boat, the disciples in the boat, very interesting. They said this to Jesus: "Truly, you are the Son of God. Truly, you are the Son of God." And it's as if Jesus is saying to them, look, it is I. I walk on water. I don't just walk on water. Also, I control the weather. I can make the wind stop. And what's more, there's something else that I do. Something which we can easily miss, which I have missed in the past. It's so simple, so obvious, so matter of fact. But we're told that Jesus gets into the boat. He gets into the boat. Jesus is saying, I walk on water, I make the wind stop, and what's more, I get into the boat. So I'm wondering today, as you listen to this, whether you're feeling fragile for any reason. A lot of people are feeling fragile because of what's been going on with the coronavirus. Life has changed, the future is uncertain. Through all of that, whatever lies ahead, Jesus comes alongside you today and he says, do you want me to get into the boat with you or not? Jesus got into the boat that day with the disciples, and he'll get into your boat if you'll allow him. He won't force his way in. He's a perfect gentleman. He invites you to say, yes, there's a place here for you. This is a great story. It's a story that you may know well. It's a story about all kinds of things. It's a story about the boldness of one person, Peter. Amazing boldness, amazing courage, risk-taking. The disciples, on the other hand, the rest of them, no risk-taking there. They play it safe. And this story also is about Jesus. It's about the difference that he makes in the storms of life. He can make a difference, and he can make a difference for you. And he can get into the boat. He can get into your boat if you will allow him to. So be encouraged this morning and let Jesus help you. Will you do that? please do. God bless you. Thank you so much for listening.